Hello and welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we're going to get into a mid-tier RB2 rankings video. So again, we're going to stick with the change in format, see how this does, see if you guys like this better. So we look forward to getting into this one. And if you don't mind, we're trying to hit 325 subscribers. So if you could hit that subscribe button for us if you're new here, we'd appreciate that a lot. Moving into the first guy that we want to talk about here is David Montgomery. So he goes up against Houston this week in what should be a pretty solid matchup. Houston isn't even expected to get Nico Collins back this week anymore. So the Houston offense might struggle a little bit to continue to score. But I do think, they should play pretty clean on special teams, pretty clean in terms of turnovers. So hopefully this game doesn't just run away and have this huge gap like we've kind of been seeing the Lions open up against a lot of the teams they've been playing lately. And last week, he kind of got back on track. Right? He had 17 carries. He had 3 catches, 20 total touches. But 2 weeks before that, he really had struggled with workload, which was something we didn't really see from Montgomery before that. I know he scored in week 8 on the ground, and he threw a touchdown in week 8. So that one, he got 14 points, kind of dismissed that with Montgomery. Just be like, oh, great, another double-digit week. And he didn't score last week, but still got double digits because he got up over 100 yards. He got 96, so right next to 100 yards, but in half PPR, pushed over 10 points. So in this game against Houston, I do think he has the ability to score. We saw the workload go back up, so I do think 15 to 20 touches, somewhere in there, is very expected. And I'm hoping, I have him in a league, so I'm hoping that he does really well this week.
Yeah, I like him a lot this week. And I think what you mentioned with Nico Collins and them having issues potentially moving the ball, I think by the time it's the fourth quarter, like we could be seeing the David Montgomery show, and Montgomery being like a model of consistency this year. He only has that one game scoring single-digit fantasy points. That was against the Vikings. He coughed up a fumble in this game. So, yeah, I feel confident in Monty this week. And I did have him number 2 in this tier. I know we'll get to my guy, but either way, really like him.
Yeah, and I think the second guy we're going to talk about here is Tyrone Tracy, right, who is your top guy. I think I had Montgomery ahead of him just because of the established player and the safety, not for the upside. If you're looking for an upside shot, I also would prefer to play Tracy, but I just have it ranked this way because Tracy, he's been great since he took over as the starter, but, it was like he had a game where he had 6 catches for 57 yards and scored in that game. So it was like 19 points, but he only had 50 rushing yards on 17 carries against the Bengals. And then last week he had 66 yards on 16 carries and didn't get a lot of he hasn't gotten a lot of passing game work since he took over the starter's job. Other than that one game, he has not topped 10 receiving yards. So I'm just looking at the Carolina game. Obviously, it's a great matchup. Okay, we're all going to get really excited to play Tracy, and I am excited to play Tracy as well. My point behind ranking him behind Montgomery is that if he doesn't score, there's a chance that he goes 17 carries, 110 yards, no score, and 1 catch for 5 yards. And, that'll be low double digits type of game, even in a game where he plays really well. And so I think that possibility of having maybe a little bit more of a floor is why I have him ranked 1 spot behind Montgomery.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, because I'm sure that the odds of, Montgomery scoring a touchdown are higher than Tracy. So I get that. And I think with Tracy, a lot of my excitement obviously stems from the Carolina Panthers. They're giving up more fantasy points to opposing running backs at a very high rate. In this game, Giants are projected to score 23 points, which is almost a touchdown higher than their season average. Kind of on and on and on about the matchup. And, obviously Tracy is a great young talent too. And I think what you mentioned with the receiving game, I can't imagine that they're looking at this guy and looking at how he was in college as a wide receiver, seeing him being productive in, one game through the air and thinking, no, let's just kind of like keep that in the box. So I know it's been a little bit of a disappointment in the receiving game work, but I just think with, if they lean into that more, like we could see like an explosion game, like 20 plus points, assuming he gets into the end zone. That's a lot of where my excitement's coming from with him.
Yeah. And the thing with the receiving game is it's been a month. We
I
haven't seen
agree.
it in a month.
I agree.
So that's why I'm a little bit timid on that.
Sure.
Obviously, if his role was going to be 5 targets a game, we saw in the game where he got more, his one game over 4 targets or with 4+ targets, and that was the game he went off. He had 9.5 reception. He caught all of his targets. Like, he can do it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's there. And I do think, too, maybe towards the end of the year or going into next year, that his role should be expanded in that aspect, too, including what he does on the ground. But I'm very excited about Tyrone Tracy just in general. Like, you have him, you are ecstatic that you got him off the wire when you did, because he is looking like
Yeah.
I set it and forget it RB2. He is looking like an excellent player that came on midseason.
Yeah, and we talked about him earlier in the offseason where it's like, we knew he was talented and we thought maybe he can kind of carve out this like passing game role. Like maybe he can get like 8 to 10 touches and be explosive with those, but like he's completely taken over this backfield. Like I know Singletary's still involved a little bit, but he's only racked up like 18 touches over the last 3 weeks. So just great to see and really exciting young player.
Moving on to the next guy we want to talk about here in this tier is Najee Harris. He goes up against Washington coming off a bye. And I do think, his role has kind of become pretty stabilized here. I know that they went up against the Raiders, Jets, and Giants, games that they were competitive in, that they were leading, and they kind of leaned into Najee. But 3 straight games of over 100 rushing yards is something he's never done in his career. And, we get kind of written off Najee as not a very productive or high efficiency player, and like 7.5 a carry, 5 a carry, 6 a carry. Like, he's actually like playing well too, on top of the fact that his production is up. So I think against Washington, right, this is a difficult matchup for any team because Washington's offense is so good and they sustain drives so well. But the Steelers also have a very good defense, and they want to maintain the ball in a similar way that Washington does on the ground. So I think his volume should continue to be in that 17 to 22 type of touch range. He had 3 catches before the bye too, so maybe he has a little bit of receiving work in this game as they try and keep the offense on the field and they try and run up the total a little bit here against Washington. But I really like Najee again this week. I would also be playing him over Tyrone Tracy. I have a little bit more faith that he can get into the end zone. I know he's only scored twice, and so is Tracy, so it's not really anything other than like a feel for how I think the game's going to go. But Najee, somebody that I very much like in this matchup, and somebody that I'd be getting into my starting lineups pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, it's crazy how the switch flipped with him. The last 3 weeks, his explosive run rate is like 20% of his runs, something crazy like that. And I guess it kind of coincides with the return of Jaylen Warren. Obviously, Russ took over a couple weeks ago. Warren, hasn't really looked healthy and hasn't been healthy, and he came back the week before the bye. He did look a little bit better, so it will be interesting to see like coming out of the bye exactly how this shakes out. But the way that Najee is running, I can't imagine he's going to be losing touches. And, they are a 2.5-point underdog in this game, so we should see a fairly neutral game script. But if Washington does like come out a couple scores early, I could see that getting away from him. That's why I have, Tracy and Monty over these guys. I just feel like with Najee, if he doesn't get in the end zone, we can be looking at like 8 points.
Yeah, which is fair, right? If he doesn't get a lot of work and he gets 85 yards, right? He gets 1 catch, and then it's like, oh, damn it, he only got 10, or oh, dang it, he only had 9. And that's why, again, if you're hunting upside, Tracy's your guy out of this group. Best matchup, and could possibly get receiving work because he can do it, and could possibly get into the end zone, or just have a massive run against that awful defense, right? Like there's a lot of upside with Tracy. It's just, trying to kind of figure out how these games are going to go is part of doing these rankings, which makes it tough when you look back and it's like, well, obviously you should have had Tracy up. And it's like, well, yeah, now that he broke off a 70-yard touchdown run, like, yeah, I agree, obviously. So you mentioned that you don't imagine that he's going to lose work. Now, I will say they're coming off a bye, and Jaylen Warren finally looked like he was decently healthy the week before the bye. Getting a full week off on top of the fact that they're going into a tough game against Washington, well, they'll probably have more throwing in the game script. Do you think there's a chance that we see a little bit more of a shift towards Warren? Or do you think there's a chance that he plays more than 50% of the snaps in this game just because they're going to be throwing so much?
I think the most important thing you mentioned was game script, right? Like I said, if they are trailing, then I can see them going away from Najee, which is kind of what scares me off in this situation. And like you mentioned too, with Warren looking a lot healthier the week before the bye, I can definitely see that. But if you look at, Najee's snap share, the last 3 games when he's been so successful, it's been like 51%
Mm-hmm.
or something. So he's not,
Yeah.
getting on the field a whole lot anyway. So I don't think that scares me maybe as much as it should or could.
That's why I picked 50, because if he expands on 50, right, if he plays more than 50%, that'll be a higher percentage for Warren than we've seen, and then it really lowers Najee's floor in terms of being able to catch some,
But I mean,
some of those
he had a
passes.
high, in the first half or part of the season when he wasn't running as effectively, he was playing more snaps. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing too.
Yep. So, and I agree. I don't think I care. Najee's not going to lose his role. Warren is going to be playing on, if he does expand any sort of role, it's going to be an expansion of the running game, not stealing carries from Najee. We know with Arthur Smith, he loves to run it. So if there's more rushes available, maybe Warren gets a little bit more work, but it's not going to be at the expense of Najee, especially with how well he's playing and how good he should feel coming out of the line. Yeah. The next running back we want to talk about here, the last guy we're going to go over, is Rhamondre Stevenson. So I've kind of been screaming from the top of the hillsides to sell him for whatever you can get. I've also seen him in buy videos from certain people, and I'm like, oh, well, it corresponds with me recommending to sell, and other people are saying to buy him. Like, let's get him off of my teams, But another week where he got just, in my opinion, just incredibly lucky with the touchdowns. I mean, they had that last drive. He had multiple catches on the last drive. And Drake May ran around behind the line of scrimmage for like 11 seconds looking for somebody, and then threw it up to like the other half of the field. And Rhamondre just happened to be the guy over there that came down with it. This was super lucky. He was not having a good game at all until that last drive. And then you look at the box score and it's like, 19.9 points. Oh my gosh. So anyways, he had 10 carries, only got 16 yards. I know Tennessee's defense is solid, but I mean, come on, that's pathetic. After coming off of 20 carries and 48 yards. So he's averaging about 2 yards a carry over his last 2 games, but he scored 4 touchdowns, completely driving his numbers. So all of that to say, I still, you can't ignore this sort of level of touchdown upside, right? I mean, we have all of these guys that we've talked about, and only Montgomery earlier in the year had a bunch of touchdowns, right? Like Tracy's only scored 2, Najee's only scored 2, and it's like, so that's why Rhamondre kind of sticks around here. Against Chicago, too, it's really hard to throw the ball against Chicago. So I think they're going to make a point to try and get Rhamondre going on the ground, try and give him another big workload, and I think that kind of fuels the ranking here and why we're putting him in this group of players.
Yeah, Rhamondre is a really interesting guy to talk about, right? Like in this game specifically, Patriots are only projected to score 16 points. They're a 6.5-point underdog. In his 3 games where the Pats have lost by more than a touchdown against the Jets, the Niners, and the Jags, he was awful, combining for 10 fantasy points in those 3 games. We've talked about him being extremely game script dependent, but I do see a silver lining potentially with this game in terms of game script, because their second game against the Jets, when we were kind of saying the same things about the game script, things like that, and he played well and they ended up winning that game. I could see that happening in this game too.
How the heck did the Jets let the Patriots beat them?
That's a whole different episode.
Yeah, I could definitely see the Patriots. The fact that the Patriots beat the Jets, I think, just illustrates how difficult it is to sweep somebody in your division any given year. I mean, it's. I can't believe they won that game. And again, it was another one where Rhamondre scored a touchdown on the last play of the game. It's just like he was having a bad game, and he scored another touchdown at the very end of the game. So I do like what you said, though, right? I mean, Chicago,
there's no
going
reason
back to this matchup.
Yeah. There's no reason to think that they can't beat the Bears. We saw what Arizona just did to them last week. Like Drake May is continuing to improve. Like that's not out of the realm of possibility. So while I do have him ranked 4th amongst this tier, which I know you do as well, like some guys just have a streak where they get barreled into the end zone. And we're seeing that with him. We're seeing that with Kareem Hunt. We saw that with Jamal Williams a couple years ago.
Yeah. I mean, 7 touchdowns on the year. I honestly can't even believe he's already got 7 touchdowns, and he's only played 8 games. It's just he's got a nose for it right now. So you kind of just lean into that when you have a player like that and wait for it to dry up and then move on, right? Like if you have Rhamondre and he's coming off a 22 and a 19.5-point game, I just can't imagine there's a situation where you're sitting him after watching both of those games. Even if you did sit him against the Jets, for example, like, right, you're like, oh gosh, like I'll play him against Tennessee, and then halfway through that game, you're like, I'm never playing Rhamondre again. And then at the end, you're celebrating, like, yes, thank God I played him. And so this week, you're just gonna keep riding the roller coaster and throw him in there. So and there's obviously the touchdown upside here that could elevate him beyond everybody in this group if nobody else scores. All right, also something that we're going to add at the end of this video now that we haven't done before, but we're kind of excited to do because we look at it and we want to share a pick with you guys every week. So we're going to look at a pick for each one of these 4 players. So we're going to look at, yards, touchdowns, and we're going to make prop bets here. And put together a 4-part parlay for these 4 players.
All right, so what do you like here for Monty? We've got we actually got worse odds to score a touchdown. We've got 58 rush, 73 rush plus receiving rush attempts. What do you think? What stands out to you here with him?
As much as I hate to do just touchdown props, 2 of these guys, I feel like we should be doing the touchdowns on Monty and Rhamondre. So I'm going to say over half of a anytime touchdown score here with Monty.
Rhamondre, we get a little bit better odds. So you want to stick with that for him here?
Yeah, so I'll stick with that. Even against Chicago, right? I think if the Patriots are going to be able to get in, it just looks like Rhamondre is who they're turning to for that. And so I think he's and getting the higher odds here too can push up your total, which I like.
So Najee, we've got 63.5 or 14.5 for his longest rush. Or we could do 5x odds on a fumble loss too. Interesting.
I'm not in on fumble lost. I feel like that is a very random stat.
That's how they get you.
I do think we got 3 straight games of over 100 yards plus coming off by, unless this game really gets away from Pittsburgh, which I just don't think it's going to. Pittsburgh has been awesome. They're 6-2. They keep every game close. I think Najee shouldn't have any problem topping that 63.5 yards, unless there's an injury.
All right, let's book it. And then last guy, we've got Tyrone Tracy.
Wow, 74.5 rushing yards. Dang, and he's got a 90.5 rush plus receiving. So those are big numbers. I was thinking Carolina, like his numbers aren't going to be that huge. We can go higher on something here, but those are pretty big numbers. So what do you think here? What would you do in terms of his props here?
So with a lot of these explosive backs, what I like to look at is one thing that I've found success with is their passing yardage or like a longest pass play. So I want to take a look at those. So longest reception is something interesting, right? 8.5 yards. The problem is, like you mentioned, like he's just not getting those receptions. So if he gets 4 targets, like I'm pretty confident one of those will go for over 8.5 yards. But at that point, I would rather just do 11.5 receiving yards anyway. What about longest rush? 14.5. We know that he's explosive, and we know that Carolina allows a lot of explosive plays. So you want to just throw on...
I'm in on that one. That was the one that stood out to me too. Against Carolina, over 14.5 for the longest rush, right? That would be something that I think is honestly expected. I mean, it just felt like he kept doing that over and over to Pittsburgh's defense 2 weeks ago. So I think against Carolina, he should be able to do that. That's an interesting prop to root for too, because you just need it to happen one time. That could happen, boom, first play of the game, and you're just like, I hit. Or it could just be literally just drag out all game. So I think that's fun to root for. All right, and with that, if you guys are still here, please hit that subscribe button as we try and get to 325, and we will look forward to talking to you in the next one.